January 1947. The British zone of occupied Germany. A weak winter light hangs over a street that no longer feels like a street. Brick dust sits in the seams of the cobblestones. Window frames open onto nothing. In the gaps between ruined walls, cold air moves freely, as if the city has forgotten how to hold heat. Near a British checkpoint, a woman stands with a child pressed close to her coat. She is not alone. Hunger has a way of gathering people into quiet lines, outside soup kitchens, near railway sidings, beside army lorries that smell of fuel and tinned rations. A British soldier watches the crowd. He is here to keep order, to enforce regulations, to represent a victory that still feels raw. But the war has ended on paper, and the need in front of him is immediate, simple, physical, and impossible to ignore. Because in post-war Germany, food is no longer just supply. It is power. Food is power because, in 1945, Germany stops functioning as a modern state almost overnight. On 8 May 1945, Nazi Germany surrenders. The fighting ends, but the collapse does not. Major cities are shattered by years of bombing. Bridges are down, rail yards are torn apart. Barges sit idle on damaged canals. In many districts, the normal chain, farm to freight car to market, has been cut into pieces. The Allies have already decided how this defeated country will be controlled. At Yalta in February 1945, and then in detail at Potsdam from July to August 1945, Germany is divided into occupation zones. The British zone stretches across the northwest. Hamburg, Schleswig-Holstein, Lower Saxony, and North Rhine-Westphalia, including dense industrial populations that cannot feed themselves without imports and reliable transport. But Britain arrives with its own limits. The United Kingdom is still under strict wartime rationing. Shipping space is scarce. Coal is life, and coal output is unstable. British military government units are tasked with disarmament, order and reconstruction, while also keeping millions of civilians alive. In that ruined landscape, a mother at a checkpoint is not an exception. She is part of the new battlefield, one measured in bread, potatoes and calories. By late 1945 and into 1946, the British zone is hit by pressures that statistics can't fully show. Millions of people are moving, former forced labourers and prisoners, evacuees returning to ruined cities, and large waves of ethnic German expellees pushed westward from Eastern Europe as borders harden after the war. Housing is wrecked. Sanitation is fragile. Disease is a constant fear. And every new arrival tightens the same equation. More mouths, fewer calories. British administrators try to make a rational system out of a country that has been physically smashed. Ration cards are issued. Warehouses are guarded. Ports like Hamburg are crucial, but imports depend on shipping, and shipping depends on fuel and political priorities. Coal becomes the hinge of everything. Without coal, power stations fail, railways stall, fertilizer production drops, and food can't be moved or preserved. A shortage in one sector cascades into hunger in another. Official daily rations for civilians fluctuate and, in many places, fall to levels that public health officials warn are unsustainable, especially for children, pregnant women, and heavy labourers. In the gaps, the black market expands. Cigarettes become currency. Farmers hide produce. City families trade heirlooms for potatoes. And at street level, this vast machinery compresses into a single moment. A British soldier, a hungry civilian, and the question of what victory is supposed to look like. In the British zone, hunger has a face, and it is often a woman's face. Many men are dead, missing, or still returning from captivity. In the cities, women clear rubble by hand, the Etrumer frowns seen across Germany's bombed streets, while trying to keep children alive on rations that frequently fall below basic nutritional needs. Cities that depend on supplies from elsewhere feel the delay immediately, in kitchens, in hospitals, in ration offices. For civilians, the crisis becomes arithmetic. Official rations, already thin, shrink in practice when deliveries don't arrive. Calories become a daily negotiation with cold. Burn less, work less, walk farther, trade more, or go without. For British authorities, the winter strips away slogans and leaves only outcomes. Keep policy rigid and risk mass hunger. Bend policy and redefine what occupation is meant to achieve. By the start of 1947, the occupation of Germany is no longer only a matter of guards, regulations, and disarmament. It is a race against systemic collapse. One answer is structural. On 1 January 1947, the American and British zones are formally combined economically into what becomes known as the B zone. It is not a sentimental move. It is a logistics decision and a strategic decision, an attempt to coordinate food, coal, transport and industry across a larger, more workable economic area. Administration becomes less about controlling a defeated country in pieces, and more about making a broken economy function in order to prevent chaos. On the ground, that shift is visible in small things: tighter coordination of distribution, greater urgency around coal movements, and an increasing recognition that a starving Germany cannot be a stable Germany. The British soldier at the checkpoint is still told to keep order. But he is also part of a system now being pushed, by winter, by numbers, by necessity, toward relief and recovery. This is where the mother's plea stops being merely personal. It becomes emblematic of a turning point. Because once food is treated as security, the occupiers' choices stop being temporary measures. They become the architecture of the post-war world. The winter breaks, but the damage lingers. Through 1947 and into 1948, British and American administrators in the B-Zone push a grim program of stabilization, repairing rail lines, prioritizing coal distribution, and trying to make rationing work as a nationwide system rather than a patchwork of local emergencies. British military government relies increasingly on German municipal structures to run day-to-day life, because no occupation force can administer every queue, every warehouse, every train schedule. Hunger does not vanish. Many families remain underfed, and the black market stays alive where official supplies cannot keep pace. But the direction changes. The objective becomes recovery sufficient to prevent political breakdown, not merely control sufficient to prevent rearmament. That shift carries Germany toward a larger reconstruction framework, taking shape across Western Europe, and it will soon harden into new borders, new currencies, and a new state. By 1948, the Western zones are moving toward a clearer economic and political separation from the Soviet zone, driven by incompatible policies and the reality that Europe's recovery is becoming part of a widening East-West confrontation. In the West, reforms accelerate. Food and fuel remain central, but so does the basic mechanism of a functioning economy. A stable currency, predictable distribution, and the return of legitimate trade over barter and black market exchange. The occupation is still an occupation, with restrictions and supervision, but its centre of gravity has shifted from punishment toward viability. In May 1949, the Federal Republic of Germany is established out of the Western zones. It is not the end of hardship, and it does not erase what came before. But it marks the political consolidation of a Western German state that will, over time, anchor itself to Britain, the United States, and Western Europe. And that leaves one final question hanging over the ruins. What did a single act of food mean inside all of this? In the Second World War, nations measure victory in territory taken, armies destroyed, flags raised over capitals. But after May 1945, the measure becomes quieter. It is measured in calories. In the British zone, a soldier's authority is real. His uniform, his orders, his power to permit or deny. Yet the war's last echo is not always a gunshot. Sometimes it is the sound of an empty pot being set back on a stove that cannot be lit because coal did not arrive. When a German mother begs for food, it is not only desperation. It is a referendum on what the victors intend to build. In those winters, the British occupation discovers a hard truth that planners rarely admit out loud. Logistics is morality, because logistics decides who eats. And the choices made in ruined streets, how strictly to enforce, how quickly to supply, how firmly to pivot toward recovery, help shape the Germany that emerges, not forgiven, not forgotten, but alive.